It's really happening now, and want everyone to know all the details, how to engage and get questions answered. Make sure that everyone knows how to participate fully. But before that, let me give us all an update on what's been happening in our efforts to fight back the virus. And we're going through some challenges, but we're also seeing some really, really positive developments. And I want to talk about the importance of testing. Look, we've said it from the beginning, it just proves more and more true all the time. The more people get tested, the better we know what's going on, and the better we can act. And from the beginning, we've said to people how important it is to just not doubt or question the testing process, but go out there and participate. It's very fair for New Yorkers. New Yorkers always ask tough questions, but really a lot of people have talked themselves out of getting tested when it would be better for themselves and all of us for people to just go and experience it and participate and help us get the truer look on what's happening at over this whole city. So that's why we have Get Tested Tuesday as a reminder to folks who have never been tested. There's still a lot of folks who have never been tested, or folks who haven't been tested in a long time, how important it is just to get out there and be a part of this, and it will actually give us the information we need to move this city forward. And we're in the middle of a set of challenges, but they're challenges we can overcome. I've talked very openly about the fact there is a threat of a second wave, but we can stop that second wave. Absolutely requires people to participate, and one of the best ways to participate is by getting tested. Now, in our school system, our public schools, we, from the beginning, determined that we would have a regular testing program, a mandatory testing program, every month, every school. And as we have started that testing program, we've just seen remarkable results. And this is a testament to everyone in our school system, the extraordinary work our staff, our educators, parents, kids, everyone has done to make sure our schools are safe. So now, after we've had testing in hundreds of schools, 16,000 plus test results have come back, only 28 students and staff have tested positive in our entire school system after more than 16,000 test results have come back. That is a positivity rate of 0.17%. This is really extraordinary. I want to emphasize, we all focus on our challenges and our difficulties, but let's take a moment to celebrate what the people of New York City have achieved. A 0.17% positivity rate. That's unbelievably good. And that means that all those precautions that have been taken in our schools are working. When we said we were taking a global gold standard approach to our schools, that's exactly what's happened. You go into a school building, you see so many health and safety measures layered one on top of another, but the proof is in the results, and these are amazing results, and this really bodes well for the future of our schools and our ability to fight and overcome this disease. Now, I want to remind all parents, all staff, the entire school community, we really want everyone to get involved in testing. And to do that, we need people to fill out those consent forms. So again, a reminder to everyone, particularly parents, go online, fill out that consent form, go to your account with the school system and do it that way, or you can fill out a paper form and send it back into school. But this testing is working, and it's helping us keep our schools safe, and it's helping our city move forward. Now, back to this historic moment, 14 days, 2 weeks to go. And in fact, if you are really itching to vote, you can vote starting as early as this Saturday, October 24th, and early voting will continue from this Saturday all the way to November 1st. Remember, voting is considered an essential service, just like the essential businesses that stay open. Voting sites will stay open throughout the city. All early voting and election day sites will be opened as planned, every borough, every neighborhood. And of course, if you prefer not to vote on election day or not even to early vote, you can still vote by absentee ballot. That deadline is coming up soon. So we are really pushing the Board of Elections to get clear information out, to not make some of the mistakes they've made previously and make this an easy, positive experience. But we're not just pushing them, we're doing our own work here at City Hall to get the word out, to encourage people, to give people answers, to make sure folks know that voting can be easy and safe. And our whole Democracy NYC team has been deeply involved in getting people engaged more than ever before. and showing people that everyone needs to participate. So here to talk about this effort, my senior advisor and general counsel to Democracy NYC, Laura Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the start of early voting approaches, we want to emphasize that voters don't have to choose between their health and their right to vote. And the Democracy NYC team is working hard to make sure that New Yorkers know how to vote safely. To that end, with the Department of Health, we've developed a How to Vote Safely During COVID fact sheet. Starting this week, the fact sheet will be available at city COVID-19 testing sites citywide, including in the hotspot areas. And it can be downloaded at nyc.gov/votesafe in 13 languages, the top 13 spoken citywide. For those who choose to vote in person, voting safely largely reflects the core four. Wear a face covering, keep your hands clean, try to keep 6 feet apart from others, avoid crowds, and if you're feeling sick, pick a different day to vote. And this year, that is easy because you can avoid crowds by voting early. Early voting, as the mayor said, starts this Saturday, October 24th, and runs for 9 days through November 1st. That includes 2 full weekends and 5 weekdays, with early morning and evening hours available. Additionally, Democracy NYC, in partnership with the Civic Engagement Commission, has developed PSAs on voting by mail, early voting, and voting rights at the polls. Starting this week, we will be running targeted ads in hotspot zones about voting absentee and early voting. These ads will run on broadcast, streaming, and social media platforms through November 1st. Lastly, we are making sure that New Yorkers have safe transportation options to get to the polls. As the mayor announced last week, we've partnered with Curb to offer $5 off yellow and green taxi rides during the early voting period. If you want to take advantage, you can download the Curb app and use the code VOTEEARLY from October 24th through November 1st. Today, we're announcing a partnership with City Bike. New Yorkers can get 50% off Election Day rides, up to $10 from 4 a.m. to 11 p.m. on November 3rd. Use the code 2020VOTE on the City Bike app to access the discount. Again, I want to encourage everyone to take the time to make a plan to vote. Choose how and when it's best for you and make your voice heard. With that, I'll turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you to you and everyone at Democracy NYC. And I know for all of you, it is a labor of love to spread the word and get people engaged and make sure voting is easy and safe. And we're going to do that to make sure all New Yorkers get involved. Now let's talk about another effort where we worked so hard to get everyone involved. And I have to say, this is really ultimately a pretty amazing story and a tough, tough challenge that, as usual, New Yorkers met and exceeded all expectations. That this is about Census 2020. We're now able to talk about our results. And I want to say at the outset, talk about something where every conceivable obstacle was thrown in our way. The pandemic, all the fear and uncertainty, all the efforts from Washington, D.C. to undermine participation, the horrible negative attacks on immigrants, everything that was done to make it impossible for the census to actually get a fair count in New York City. And yet, in the end, after all of this, the self-response rate for New York City, 61.8%. That's essentially identical to the rate in 2010, but with so many more challenges in the way. And I just have to say, when you look at this response, it makes me very proud of New Yorkers that people answered this census in such strong numbers. What a vote of confidence in this city, and also what an amazing action by New Yorkers. With every effort to undermine and discourage them, they still came through. All of you came through. That's an amazing number given what we were up against. We saw some really great results. 4 out of 5 boroughs, in fact, reached higher response rates than in 2010. We saw in the African American community major improvements in the response rate. This is something that everyone should be proud of, but I particularly want to thank our incredible census team that took on this challenge, and they had no quit in them. No matter what was thrown at them, they kept fighting. And I want to thank our director, Julie Menon, and her whole team, and the incredible partners all over the city that joined together that just would not give up. And when you heard people say, make sure you're counted, they meant it. And they went out there and they did it. So Julie, congratulations to you and your team. Tell us all about the final results.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank you for your support of our efforts, and also thanks to the City Council. So as the Mayor said, no census has faced headwinds like the 2020 census, whether it was the attempt to add the citizenship question, underfunding the census, constant attacks by the White House, or literally the Supreme Court cutting short our deadline by 2 weeks. And if that were not enough, having the fact that when the first mailer went out in March to New Yorkers, COVID hit, and we were literally the epicenter of this global pandemic. As a result of the pandemic, our effort to open over 300 census centers was stymied, and I mention that because in a city where a third of New Yorkers lack access to broadband, that is a true impediment. Now, before COVID hit a year ago, the U.S. Census Bureau predicted that our self-response rate would be 58%. And I'm so proud to announce today that not only did our team reach 61.8%, but we beat LA and Chicago and Boston and Philadelphia and Miami and Dallas and Houston and many other areas. And we also Census Bureau's prediction pre-COVID by close to 4 points. So why is that important? It's so important because for every household over 2 people that is counted, that brings New York City $7,000 per year, or $70,000 over 10 years, not to mention, of course, the importance of the political representation. We could not, as the mayor said, have done this without our closest partners, our citywide partners group, our complete count fund of grantees, faith-based organizations, labor unions, volunteers, and so many others. We have a slide here about the neighborhoods that have improved the most, so I'll quickly go to that. And you can see the Bronx, Parkchester, Queens, Laurelton, Brooklyn, Prospect, Lefferts Garden, Staten Island, Park Hill, and Manhattan Central Harlem. But we have so many other good stories to tell. Just briefly on the data, our team sent 7 million texts, 4 million phone calls. We had over 1,000 events. And through our outreach, we assisted 500,000 households to actually complete the census, and the digital ads drove over 1 million click-throughs to the census website. We had 34 media campaigns in 27 languages, and we had everyone from Cardi B to Alicia Keys to Lin-Manuel Miranda to Cal Penn, as well as everyday New Yorkers. And while we certainly have so much to be proud of, the fight isn't over. So I do want to close with the fact that we want to ensure that the count is accurate. President Trump will be in office in December, irrespective of the election, and so we will obviously closely monitor the data because we know certainly that there were some issues regarding the door knocking. And we also remain a plaintiff on the case led by Attorney General Tish James before the Supreme Court on November 30th in the Trump administration's attempt to exclude undocumented from congressional apportionment. So we need to still remain vigilant. But in closing, this campaign really proves that through the right and smart investment and outreach, New Yorkers really come through, and we are thrilled with the results today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you so much, Julie, and everyone. Look, this is about the future of this city. So your effort to respond to this census now is going to give us a much greater sense, a much greater ability to get our fair share. This is what the census was always about, getting our fair share. Because New Yorkers came through, we have much more chance of actually getting what we deserve from Washington. But as Julie said, these next weeks ahead are crucial to make sure that what happens from this point on is fair, and that's why we are going to be engaged in the court process to make sure that what happens in Washington now doesn't further undermine a fair count for New York City. So thank you, Julie. Thank you to your whole team. Okay, with that, everybody, let's go to indicators. Okay, number 1, daily number of people admitted to New York City hospitals for suspected COVID-19. Threshold 200 patients. Today's report, 62 patients with a confirmed positivity rate of 19.7% for COVID. Number 2, new reported cases on a 7-day average. Threshold 550 cases. Today's report, 496. And number 3, percentage of people tested citywide positive for COVID-19. Threshold 5%. Today's report, 2.52%. And today's 7-day rolling average number is 1.58%. A few words in Spanish. Solo faltan 2 semanas para el día de elecciones. El martes 3 de noviembre es nuestro deber votar. En nuestra ciudad, la votación temprana inicia este sábado, 24 de octubre, hasta el domingo 1 de noviembre. Todos los sitios van a estar abiertos para votar temprano y el día de las elecciones, incluso las escuelas y edificios que ahora están cerrados por el coronavirus. With that, we will turn to our colleagues in the media, and please let me know the name and outlet of each journalist.
With us today, we have Health Commissioner Dr. Dave Chachki, Senior Advisor Dr. Jay Varma, Laura Wood, Senior Advisor and General Counsel of Democracy NYC, and Census Director Julie Menon. With that, we'll go to Narmeen from Pix 11.
Hi, Mayor. Good morning. How are you?
Good, Narmeen. How are you?
I'm doing well. Wanted to touch base with you a little bit more about those daily indicators and whether you've had any more conversations with the governor about what could potentially be coming tomorrow about the zoning changes and the maps changing at all. I know a lot of folks are waiting to hear what could come.
Look, we are also waiting to get the final word from the state, but we're hopeful about Central Queens. Obviously, we have to look at data every single day, and sometimes you have a variation in the data that causes it. We continue to see what we've seen for the last few days. I have every expectation that the state is preparing to act to remove restrictions to Central Queens. But again, pending final confirmation, pending final look at the data. We got some more to do in some of the other neighborhoods, but I have to say, again, what we're seeing in Central Queens reminds everyone that we can move through this quickly. And if folks go out looking, that we can get through this quickly. If folks do the social distancing and wear the mask, we can get through this quickly. So hopefully we get good news in Central Queens soon, and then the other areas soon thereafter. Go ahead.
Mayor, sticking to that a bit, I know you were a bit reluctant to talk about zip code by zip code, understanding of how the numbers are doing, how the projections. But I wonder if you can give us a better understanding of how other parts of Brooklyn and Queens are doing outside of Central Queens. Are we seeing a continued leveling off? Is it slightly going up? Is it going down? Is it where you want it to be?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a leveling off all over the city. We saw that 7-day rolling average number. Knock on wood, we have every single day more work to do. And again, we're not out of the woods in those red and orange zones. But in general, the city continues to do well. And the key here is cost.
Next up, we have Jacob from Jewish Insider.
Good, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing great. So there was a report, and I just wanted to see if you can confirm that the report that you yesterday. And the report says that voters that are coming to you and yourself expressed certain regret on the approach they took early on. And I wanted to see if you can expand on that, whether you think that the community and city government is on the reset.
Well, I think we absolutely need a positive reset. It was a very moving meeting, a very productive meeting. Group of leaders from Brooklyn and Queens, some of whom I've known very, very well for as much as 20 years. And a very honest meeting.
What's up, Mike?
We really took our time to talk through everything that had happened from the beginning.
Yeah, good stuff last night, man. Breaking down that that racist ass motherfucker, man.
How confusing it's been.
I heard you up on that.
But I think what the meeting really helped me to appreciate is that
schooling them on that,
so many people in the community
punk ass motherfucker,
and they need to know that we, as the city government, understand something. And that we other more and understand each other. I did express my regrets. Look, I think in the beginning of this process, I thought we had done some good work to communicate with community leaders about how important it was to all work together, and I thought I saw a really good result. Honestly, I did say that we had amazing support from community leaders and institutions. And I said at the time, people doing really tough things like closing houses of worship voluntarily at the height of the crisis in March and April. But, you know, I look back now and understand there's more dialogue with people. I certainly got very frustrated at times when I saw large groups of people still out without masks. But I think more dialogue would be better. So I certainly want to express my regret that I didn't figure out how to do that better. And obviously, you know, that one night in Williamsburg, I let my frustration and concern get away with me, and I should have been more careful in my language, and I've expressed my apology for that before. But I think it was a good, honest conversation about how hard it is to get people in the community to understand the ever-changing environment. Why the information coming from the government is something they can have faith in when there's been so many changes, so many mixed messages from Washington, D.C. And I think the number one takeaway from the meeting was more dialogue, more communication. Is the way forward. Go ahead, Jake.
You got it.
You mentioned mass testing and that the numbers are leveling off in certain red zones. Do you have a specific indication where mass testing has indicated a better sample of what the real positive rate is? Or is it just leveling off because we are seeing people...
The dope shit is you can play this on the phone now. They got a streaming service. You can actually hook your Xbox controller up to
both, Jacob.
the phone
I think,
for the streaming service. That's kind of fly.
what we learned long ago in places like Sunset Park and Soundview is when you alert people to a problem,
there you
you
go,
educate and you do mass distribution, things like that, it really does help get folks to be more disciplined. We certainly see in the red and orange zones more and more people wearing masks, more and more people practicing social distancing. That really helps unto itself.
Social distancing.
But I think obviously, you know, anytime you
How
get
could you
more
put your
testing, you get a better
social
look at
dick
things.
in things if
And in
you're
a lot of the
social
city,
distancing?
folks were getting to pretty low levels of testing, and you know, still, as I said, a lot of New Yorkers never got tested at all. That actually makes it harder to understand what's going on. So I think we clearly are seeing an uptick in testing now that we've sounded the alarm, and it does not surprise me at all. The more testing, the clearer picture, and
How are you
typically
supposed
what we found
to
is
stick
the more
in things
testing,
if you're
the better.
social distancing?
Next up is Bob
It's
from the Chief
bogus.
Leader.
Is it, King? Yeah, you know
Good morning,
this.
Mr. Mayor.
How are you, Bob?
Shit is ringed.
Okay, I'm a little bit concerned. I did see this study from New York School of Global Public Health that looks at TW Local 100 and the status of the workforce there. They're reporting that based on their survey, which does reflect the demographic of the workforce, our essential grade workforce, 1 in 4 TW Local 100 members working for the MTA may have contracted COVID, and 90% are getting the virus at work. This is the first of its kind. It has some limitations, but I'm wondering if this doesn't show that we really need more attention, even as we struggle with the election and the rest, to looking at the occupational consequences of living with this virus.
Yeah, Bob, that's a really good point. There is no question, you know, so many frontline working people showed up and put themselves forward to protect everyone else and help everyone else and keep the city going and keep, you know, in case of our transit workers. Because of them, all of the other essential workers were able to get to work and keep the city going, starting with the healthcare workers. So the transit workers played a really heroic role. But we do need to look really carefully at what the lasting impact is and support people. Right now, we're obviously trying to overcome the crisis in front of us, but I think you're right that this is going to be an important issue going forward in the city. How can we help those who did so much for us? Go ahead, Bob.
as a follow-up, one of the things that comes out of this survey that's of concern and kind of ties into the overarching theme of the election is that the members responding are evenly divided with like 31% to 32%.
Just know that's not on
not having
that
confidence
leg
in any vaccine
that we know so
the
well.
government might offer. Can you talk about, and you've been dealing with this now, the challenge of having, you know, this is the town and first responders that remembers the EPA guarantee about the air being safe to breathe in Lower Manhattan. How can government rebuild this trust?
Yo, he's talking about some real shit. The air in Lower Manhattan is very dangerous to breathe, or at least it has been for the last, like, or should I say the first 10 to 15 years after the 9/11 shit. Within like a few mile radius, the air is cancerous.
I guess I'd say simply this.
But,
there has been,
you know, it's going to take probably
years and years,
generations until those effects are known.
a degradation
You know what I'm
of
saying?
trust in all institutions in
Now,
American
the city
society.
tried to
with
front
very
like the
few
air is good money, like
exceptions.
there's nothing wrong with
And
it.
if we wanted to have a longer discussion, we would go back to the Vietnam War and Watergate and all the things that started that in motion. And the truth that came out that didn't used to come out. And I think it's gotten a lot worse in recent years. And I think history is going to show that that lack of trust was deeply intensified during the time of the Trump administration. But that is not a permanent feature. It's something we can overcome. And I think what you find is that people actually do have a lot of trust in that which is most local to them. Maybe it's at the neighborhood level, maybe it's their labor union, you know, maybe it's a clergy member or faith group, but there are still places where people have trust. We've got to rebuild a bigger trust. It's going to take a lot of work, but I do believe it can be done. But on this specific issue of the vaccine, your parallel 9/11 is a very, very good one. That was actually, that decision by the EPA was one of the most tragic decisions in recent memory in the history of this city, and it still hasn't been examined enough, but it's an exact example of why people question government across the board. When it comes to the vaccine, I think people will believe it more if it's really consistently validated by healthcare professionals. There is still a lot of respect for the healthcare profession. So I think if you hear a consensus of healthcare leaders, that will be the single most important factor in giving people comfort in taking a vaccine. I think the second will be watching friends, neighbors, family take it and see if it works. And
Well, let someone else do it first, see what they do with
more
that.
comfortable themselves. That's my kind of common sense view. But let me have Dr. Varma and Dr.
He even
Chillin
said, that's my
discuss
common
this one.
sense view. That's what I'm going to do. I ain't taking that shit. You take that shit first.
I can go ahead and start.
Give me like a year,
I
see
think
what
everything
happens.
the mayor said
you know.
it's right on target, and I can tell you from my own personal
Vladimir
experience
Putin
working
said,
on
fuck that. He gave it to his daughter,
devastating outbreaks
allegedly.
throughout the world.
They'll
That
be
loss
frightened.
of trust in institutions.
He said
and
they got the vaccine. They don't give a fuck
it's
about
really
trials.
fuel and
He's
propagation.
going to hard body with it.
When it comes to something as important as a vaccine, I do feel confident that, you know, the scientists working in FDA, and in fact the scientists working at the companies that are developing this, are really committed to making sure that any vaccine is safe and effective. Nevertheless, we have seen the possible influence of
You heard?
pressures
Like
on,
cattle.
organizations.
They'll tell you to
and
praise
institutions.
the
So it's
Lord,
very
but we
incumbent upon
endangered,
us
y'all.
as, you know, the health officials that are
Because that
tasked
man with a badge
with
might
helping
clap
New
you.
Yorkers
Now,
to
ride
fight
with
this
me.
virus, making sure that we independently and
Blackness
accurately
observed
also
itself,
assess
and matter
and
was
endorse
born.
the quality of that
Mathematic
information.
equations
And then,
and
of course,
patterns
for
are
people
spawned.
to have discussions with
Fibonacci
their
5,
trusted
science of
advisors,
God.
obviously their family,
Witness
friends, and
proportion.
colleagues, but also their medical providers. And I do have a lot of confidence that if there is that independent assessment outside of the federal government and industry, that we will be able to gain the
Yeah,
trust
they want
when
to stay
there
here
is
to
a safe
find
and
nice
effective
AI.
vaccine developed.
Dr. Chox, you want to add?
Yes, thank you. I'll just add one brief point here, which is first to underline, yes, how important and how much of a pillar this idea of addressing trust will have to be to our vaccination strategy for COVID-19 in New York City. The piece that I wanted to build upon is the idea that healthcare providers, clinicians, will be a central part of this. And in fact, in the study that you cited, Bob, one of the things that rose to the forefront was the idea that people still do trust their doctors. As someone who's practiced primary care for several years, there's no substitute for the relationships that are developed with one's patients, going through thick and thin with them for momentous decisions like these. So a big part of what we will do is not just the overall citywide public messaging about the science, about the validity of the studies that we're looking at, but really working hand in hand with trusted community physicians and other healthcare providers as well.
So the LA Patreon account
Next, we have Yoav.
apparently already spent how much? 27, 37, 47, $53, if I'm not mistaken, to hinder Lamar Wills from making money. But that $53 you spent with Lamar Wills. So before the time that the effects of what you do will take any major effect, it'll probably give him like a 2 or 3 week
is over a 4-week
length of
stretch.
time of profiting.
So I'm wondering if you can just
$53. You bought the $9 membership 3 times, and then you copped the $25 membership.
Data or your team.
It ain't even like you're spending $53 with some other entity to take him down. No, you're spending $53 with the entity you're trying to take down. So it's like you didn't even break even yet. You know what I'm saying? You're gonna have to do damage, $53 worth in Patreon subscribers,
of how to address this immediate
and then you're going to be breaking even. And then anyone that you take out the game after that or hinder from him making money, that's when you start, I guess you call that profiting, if you want to say. Spike profit, that's when your spike profit starts.
With our data, but in terms of
you're going to mess them up in the long run, you have to wait and see.
And this was actually a topic.
The bigger picture, damn,
last night at the meeting I had with community leaders.
I'm aware of all that type of shit. I mean, I actually saw you typing that in my mind as I'm saying all this shit.
And Williamsburg is a good.
But I mean, honestly, there's another factor that when people want to support, they're going to support.
Focus on testing, a lot of community support.
Now, I will say something. I see something that you kind of fucked the game up immediately.
Those numbers have stayed.
That I do see, like the fact that live streams. I copped the $5 joint jump off on.
But testing makes
sense. And the
sense.
fact that he ain't doing the live streams on the $5 jump off.
Reliable. And the
you know what I mean? That's kind of like for the $5 cats and the $9 cats. It's kind of like damn, son.
In the explanation of why people
gotta protect your shit,
don't trust testing.
It wasn't for niggas like you and these shenanigans
that have been spread to discourage people from testing. Some of it aligns to the reality of what we saw back with the measles crisis and sort of the
I mean, I guess it's good to know that you believe in the brother.
Discouraging belief in
you
science,
believe in the idea of him having a long run.
Some of that's ideological.
So, that's kind of good in and of itself.
Folks hearing rumors.
How much damage it'll do?
I got a negative test. It wasn't
roughly estimately say not really much of any.
And get tested.
It's like bootlegging an album. It's like when people want support, they're going to support
one of these concerns. Dr. Katz, who was a part of the meeting last night, was really struck by that point that if folks don't believe that their test result will be accurately reflected, that actually discourages testing instead of encouraging.
Now, I got all my music, well, not all my music, a lot of my music I have on YouTube videos.
In fact,
that still don't stop, people supporting you and fucking me on Spotify and copying MP3s and shit like that.
The greater likelihood.
In fact, when you upload music, they put it on YouTube. You don't even do that. The same entities that put it on other platforms for people to purchase it is the same entity that makes YouTube videos for it. So they even see that having it free to stream and everything isn't really a hindrance.
Seeking more specific. As far as which neighborhoods.
So we got MP3 downloaders. If niggas want to save my shit, to go take every song in my albums that I have on YouTube and download the MP3 and do it that way, as opposed to copying the whole project.
Purchase of Reliant, the bus company. I'm just wondering why it makes sense during a financial crisis to make a move that appears to be intended to save
money. Somebody working with some kind of change though. You got $53 for that, for some long-term shit.
Are going to be on the short term.
Shit, I got somebody put me onto a $50 Susu thing where I could like flip a couple G's out of it. I'm like, I figured something like that is well more spent.
Custodial services team as well. When we had, that was the first.
You got spike bucks like that.
How do we have such crucial services in our schools
some type of way
that are not part of
chop off your nose to spite your face?
And it led to all sorts of problems.
Spike
history around, going back decades,
I don't got spike
problems with custodial services was pretty clear. we created a public, nonprofit approach that really improved the work of custodial services and became the template for what we looked at here with school buses. With school buses, and I go back, not only as someone who was a school board member in Brooklyn long ago, but also as a public school parent, the whole reality of school buses has been, many, many companies, all different, question marks every year about how the school year would begin, whether the service would be there, obviously the threat of strikes, so many different pieces. And the question always was, could we create a more rational approach? So having school bus service increasingly under a
I saw some little kids today. They were being evacuated from
very much
a school building when I was jogging.
New York City and the long-term.
I didn't know if that means somebody in there had that shit or what it was.
Lead to more reliable.
Sure evacuated the building.
Safer school
Little
bus
shorties
service,
all coming out with masks on.
less disruption, and ultimately will save us money. So I think it's a very smart direction for this city. Go ahead.
Next, we have Aaron from Politico.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask about the
From Brooklyn to Staten Town, the Queens area, and back down. And why is where we put my Mac down? Show me love.
Have returned these consent forms. So how is that working when you're, if your number comes up in this random choice and you haven't filled out the form? At this point, has anyone been forced to go to remote because they're not getting tested, or are you just skipping over them and hoping they'll fill it out eventually? And why is this number so low?
Oh, that's the hamburgers. I don't know that.
Aaron, very good question. Your second option is exactly what's happening, and that's what was the plan from the beginning. We knew it would take time for parents to focus on this. We knew there'd be valid questions that we had to answer. So right now, we've had plenty of folks to be tested. Not a problem at all. We're going to keep getting more and more consent forms. They've been coming in steadily. I don't see a problem in the short term. I think what's going to happen is you just need an available pool. Depending on the school, it's 10% to 20% of students and staff, educators, the whole community. And so far, we've had plenty of folks to get tested. As we go forward, we have to keep getting back more and more consent forms, no doubt. But I think we're on the right trajectory. Down the line, if we have a problem, we'll address that then. We've been very clear about how that would be addressed, but that's not a problem right now.
All right, thank you. And then we haven't talked for a while about deaths from this disease, but with this latest spike, I just wanted to get the update. Obviously, it's thankfully so much lower than it was once, but what are we seeing on average in terms of New Yorkers who are still dying from this disease in terms of the numbers? And has it gone up at all with the latest outbreaks?
It's a crucial, the most essential question, really, and I appreciate it. I'm going to just say something and turn to Dr. Choksi and Dr. Varma. I try to be always the person who puts things into as plain English as possible as a layman. But this is what struck me as I've looked at this challenge over these last weeks. The number of hospitalizations daily really hasn't moved a lot. The percentage of COVID positivity among the hospitalizations hasn't moved a lot. The citywide 7-day average hasn't moved a lot. These are really hopeful signs. But what's been extremely striking, and thank God, that the number of deaths has not been increasing markedly. And we're dealing with something very different here, obviously, than we dealt with in March and April. But our profound concern is to not let this challenge gather steam and not allow a second wave in the door. So far, it has been absolutely better than what we went through, but we still have to stay very vigilant. Dr. Johnson.
Did you listen?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the very important question. The mayor is right that we are not seeing an increase in overall deaths, and that's been true over the last several weeks to several months. The total number of deaths per day is averaging in the single digits, and we do have the specifics up on our data page for the Department of Health. Of course. Any death is something that we hope to avoid. And so we will not, we will not end our efforts to try to prevent as much of that suffering as possible to save as many lives as we can.
There's that news
To point out about this is that we know that hospitalizations and deaths lag and increase cases. We saw that earlier this year, and we're seeing it around the world that are experiencing much more.
That guy looked like Mr. Bean, the Indian version.
So that's why it's so important for us to stay focused on the cases, the test positivity, things that are earlier indicators so that we can avert as much of that suffering as possible.
Dr. Varma, you want to add?
Nothing else for me.
Thank you.
Next, we have Bert from 3 Plus.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and everyone on the call.
How are you, Gert?
Over the summer, the city had mass protests over police misconduct, some of which led to incidents that you yourself agreed were not well handled by the NYPD. Now we are at the precipice of an election in which the president has not indicated whether he will step down if he loses, and in fact has hinted that there will be violence.
Wow.
Scenario might involve
Nigga said he won't step down if he loses and there will be violence.
The NYPD's union
Say
has
what?
endorsed the president. We need to know the extent to which you, the governor, the police commissioner, and others have really gamed out the various scenarios to deal with the potential for widespread unrest and violence, and the possibility that the police force has conflicted members. Now, I know you can easily dismiss this question as private talk for now, but the public needs to know the details and the extent of your discussion.
I would not dismiss the question, Gert. I think it's a fair question. It's something that Commissioner Shea and I have talked about. That kind of work to prepare is happening right now in the NYPD and at City Hall, and we are going to have a very clear approach, because I'm not going to be surprised if there's a prolonged count, whatever it may be in this election, and extremely strong views, and a lot of people out expressing themselves, and we have to protect the right to protest, and, we expect and should be ready for a lot of peaceful protest, and obviously we're going to have to deal with it if anyone attempts violence, and we have to stop that violence. I think something that's been very sad to me in recent months, never experienced this before in my, many years working around the city, is people literally saying that they think what a leader of the PDA says reflects the whole NYPD, and that's just false. That's painfully, bluntly false. And I don't know what happened in this city that could become so unclear. And I think it's something we're going to have to work on a lot going forward. But no, the PBA leadership does not speak for the men and women of the NYPD. I would tell you, having gotten a real good sense of the members of the police force that hold a broad range of views, I would note again, this is a majority people of color police force that is very, very substantially city residents. It's not one thing or another. It should not be stereotyped. And so you're going to have police officers that have views across the spectrum, but I also think you've seen overwhelming officers leave their politics at home and they go and do what has to be done to keep people safe and to respect the program. And any officer who can't or won't do that, we have to address. But I don't get the indication that is a widespread challenge. I know a lot of people feel it. I know there's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of fear on so many fronts right now. But it's not what I see in all that I work on day to day with the NYPD, including right down to the grassroots level. And I know that the leadership of the NYPD would not tolerate people bringing their politics into the work. So, very a lot of work to prepare. But if you go by the history of the city, peaceful protest is a New York City tradition, and it's been honored and respected and managed, peacefully. That's what it's. Go ahead.
Appreciate that, and let me come at it from a different perspective. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in an interview said we should plan for massive demonstrations in the streets to make sure that people retain their power. But the people leaders, the police force, again, may not be on the side of those demonstrators based on the fact that the majority of the police force lives in the suburbs. Its union has endorsed the president. Doesn't that concern you at all?
Gersh, again, I wish I could help people understand what I've seen over decades and decades. I'll try my best. Of course, if you say it like that, who wouldn't be concerned? But that's not the reality that I've experienced.
Topping niggas off!
It's a very professional police force. Now,
topping off your top! I'm not gonna top your nigga off, but I'm gonna top off your top!
What I thought about it today, and I said, let me
topping the top of the nigga off
today versus what I thought about the police.
But I'm not gonna top this specific nigga off, because that'll be like topping niggas off.
It was a police force that was much less
in the dick suckery sense
to honor, and balance all of its obligations. And we saw some very troubling things in the 1980s and 1990s. Today, I think it's a different reality. There are individuals who have done some things absolutely wrong, and they need to experience the right punishment. But if you talk about the police force as a whole, spend time talking to officers. This is my challenge to all of you in the media. Go talk to everyday officers. First of all, I will challenge everyone's assumptions and everyone's sense of how politics works. Talk to officers. If you take a representative sample of our police officers, it means most people you will talk to are people of color. It means that almost half the people you talk to live in New York City. You are going to find many, many officers who believe there needs to be real change in our society. You are going to find many officers that believe there's still a lot of racism that has to be overcome. You're going to find that in officers of all different backgrounds. And then you'll find officers who may have a more conservative view as well, but you're not going to find one thing. And then as you go up the ranks, you will find a very professional group of people, also diverse in their views, but who believe deeply that their job is to protect the democratic process and protect peaceful protest. And I've spent so much time listening and with, a critical ear because of the work I did years ago and the world I came out of. I had every reason to have a critical ear. But no, I just disagree with that assumption. I think it would be more constructive for us to say, okay, let's talk about what it's going to take to protect peaceful protest. You're absolutely right. We should assume there'll be a lot of it. And if there's any effort by President Trump to undermine democracy and stop the will of the people, I would expect New Yorkers to turn out and fight against that and peacefully, and I would expect partisans of President Trump to come out. The NYPD's job is to make sure that all of that is handled peacefully and honored. Unquestionably, they're up to that job and they believe in that job. And my job is to make sure that happens, and then if any individuals do the wrong thing, there has to be consequences for them. Go ahead.
We have time for two more. Next up is Alejandra from AM New York.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. How are you doing?
Good, Alejandra. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I just have one question. Another reporter asked my second one. There are a handful of city council members calling for a moratorium on shelter transfers until there's a
Dark-skinned
COVID
Avenger,
vaccine.
what's going on, sweetie?
I'm curious to hear your thoughts
In the
on
building.
this, and if you would
I tried to
consider
catch the show.
imposing a
You
moratorium
gotta give
until
it some
there's
time. I
a
always put it on
vaccine
Friday.
available, or at least
I came
until
at the very, very
positivity
end, right
rates in Brooklyn and
right
Queens
before
are
that
lower.
circle
Thank you for the
spun
question,
to suggest that you ended it. So what I do,
Look,
move the sliding
in
thing all the way to
everything
the
involving
beginning.
our shelter
Like,
since
boom,
this
like 5-10
crisis,
seconds.
our
That
shelter
joint said,
system,
this
I
shit
should
is
say, since this
private.
crisis
I was
hit,
like,
we've turned to our healthcare leadership, we've turned to our homeless services leadership to determine how to keep people safe, and made the decision, obviously, to get a lot of people out of congregate shelter and into hotels. We have a very different reality now. We're watching it constantly, but right now we have a very different reality, thank God, a much better healthcare reality. And even though the process of going back to congregate shelter would be a long one. And I think on that level, I don't expect to see a lot of changes in terms of going back to congregate shelter anytime soon. But in terms of going, for example, a situation like we're talking about now, getting out of a hotel to get people to an actual shelter with services, I still think that makes sense. In fact, it's the safer option because the services are there, the healthcare is more available. And we also have to remember, we have to be able to pursue more than one goal at once, and the hotels just are not the ideal option for homeless people. It's not the best way to support them on their path, out of shelter and to affordable housing. So I would not think in terms of a blanket approach. I think we have to put the healthcare considerations front and center, and we have to be particularly careful about anything that might involve going back to a congregate setting. And none of the things that we've talked about in recent weeks have to do with those congregate settings. Those are a whole different topics that we have not addressed so far. Thank you, Alejandro.
Last, we'll go to Katie from the Wall Street Journal.
Katie, can you hear us? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Try again.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
You got me, great, thanks. I wanted to go back to something that Yoav had asked, and it is regards to the data. There has been a discrepancy between city and state data since COVID began. There were always different numbers. They said it was down to some sort of delay. So I guess the question is, why now that you have parts of the city shut down due to rising COVID rates? Why now would you stop releasing this data that could be the difference between a child going back to school or not? It seems that, again, it's sort of, you're afraid we're going to be confused, but I guess we've been confused since March because there's always been this. So why not just release the data as you have it so we all know what's going on?
Yeah, I understand the question. I would just disagree that because there's been a difference in the data before, we should take an action now based on that. I would say no, we have a very specific and very brief reality, literally a matter of weeks from everything I can see. I presented a plan, the state came in with another plan, we're aligning to the state plan. I want to get through this period. Again, I'm hopeful
what are you
very
talking
soon
about?
we're going to start to come out of restrictions.
You
in
act
Central
like I'm not
Queens,
the guy
and then,
who tells cops to
in the
their
other
fucking
parts
face.
area over the next couple of weeks.
What are you talking about?
Slate, and then what
Nigga,
I
I've told
do
cops
is go
to their
back
face,
to a
motherfuckers
focus
play with me,
on
I'll kill 'em.
providing the data regularly by zip code and make that the corner realm. And we're going to have that conversation with the state as well about the virtue of.
All right, it's time to go outside, and I gotta go get this litter.
Because I just think it's easier for everyone to make sense of. But I want us to get through this immediate period without creating even another level of confusion. And then we're going to clear the slate and start over and put out the data on what we think